So hello again, everyone. Welcome to our third webinar within our course on how to monitor, evaluate, and learn for think tanks. Hope you're all hearing me well. We've done some testing. Everything was working fine, but we've lost Dena. I'm waiting for her to show up. And in the meantime, I'll start sharing the agenda for today. She's there. So
I'm right here.
Okay, all yours, Dena.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I was just about to start. You want to share the agenda, Vanessa?
Okay, so today we are going to briefly recap where we are, and the two main issues that we will address are related to the contents of the modules that you are going through, and that's the how to develop a strategy and the story of change that is behind it. And then we'll delve into outcomes indicators. We'll try to go through some of them and discuss them with you today. Of course, that since both things are quite complex and extensive, we'll prioritize what we think is more important for modules, but feel free to tap in if you have come across other issues related to the M&E&L strategy and outcomes that you want to discuss. And then finally, as usual, we'll share next steps. So Dena, all yours. Want to start?
Okay, great. So I know that we've been keeping you quite busy with lots of readings and lots of exercises. And today we have the opportunity to recap a little bit, to refresh from what we've been looking at in the different modules. So the focus of today, we're going to look, the first half of this webinar is talking through what is an M&E&L strategy and how do you define the change that you want to bring about, and what are the tools that you can use for doing that. So the purpose of an evaluation and learning strategy is to really help you to address how you are going to answer whether you are achieving your policy influence objective, and to answer your policy influence questions that we spoke about in the previous webinar. There's no one way of doing an M&E&L strategy. It is really up to you and to your organization how extensive or how narrow you want to make it. But some of the components that it could include would be to go think about what the drivers and motivations are for your monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategy. Remember in the background note in webinar 1, we spoke about things like accountability, empowerment, learning. And it may be that if you choose to focus on one of those things, then you will choose a particular set of tools and approaches to measure that. Whereas if you want to have a wider set of motivations, although those exist, then you can choose a different approaches. So that's an influencing factor in what you will choose for your strategy. The other, which was not shared in the forum, sorry for that, was shared in module 3 on page 4. We spoke about different levels in the organization where you can focus your monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategy. You can either look at the organization as a whole, you can focus on a specific program, or even just one project, or even an activity if you're really just starting out and you want to test. So organizations that are already some way down the line with their monitoring, evaluation, learning systems would probably be doing the whole organization. But if you wanted to implement something new or shift, for example, I worked with an organization that was doing monitoring evaluation but wanted to shift to a more outcomes focus. They first tested that on one of their programs, saw what could work, and then they used that to spread that out to the rest of the organization. So decide what level you want to choose. Then what policy influence goals or changes are that you want to link to this level. This is then become the focus of your monitoring, evaluation, and learning system. And then to think about what are the strategies going to be achieved, used to achieve those goals. in terms of what are the outputs, outcomes, and the methods and approaches that you will use to achieve it. This is defined usually when we're talking about result logic or theories of change, pathways of change. What is the pathways, or how do you define change? Then once you define your change, you can allocate indicators and data sources, or different ways of using that. Is log frame talks about means of verification. Some people talk about tools or data sources that you will need in order to answer your question. So some of people shared in the forum what are the kinds of tools that you're using already to answer those kinds of questions. So before we go into some examples of how you do that, I'd like to ask you to think about how your organization does planning. What are some of you could share in the forum, what are some of the planning documents that you have? Do you have a strategic plan? Do you have a logic model? Do you have a theory of change? Do you maybe only have proposals to funders, and that's where your theories of change, your pathways to change sit? Let's start with that first question. Who would like to share? I think just go away on the chat. Just put in there what it is that your organization has in terms of planning documents. Or that you know what other organizations may have, if you're a consultant or an independent. Okay, global strategy. Okay, so that's obviously a very high level document that you would then want to align your monitoring evaluation system to, but make it much more localized. Okay, so each project has a log frame. Great. Jiva says that you use a bit of outcomes, but it's kind of more ad hoc, so it may not be all together in some kind of a plan, but you know what it is that you're working towards. So some organizations are very sophisticated, they've got global strategies, and some organizations, and then I think the challenge is then to localize those, and other organizations are doing stuff in a more ad hoc way as they go along. Yes, so very often the frameworks for monitoring evaluation, or the plans that people have, are influenced by donor agreements. That's as Sylvester is sharing. Strategy, exactly. So strategy documents are a key source of where organizations usually state what their vision is, what their mission is, and what their strategic goals are. I usually like to think of strategic plans being more on the kind of organizational side, on organizational development, organizational vision, mission, values, and planning documents being like program planning documents, being more around program theory and program strategies. So more outward focused, specific on specific programs and projects. Theory of change, of course, is the latest kid on the block. It's been kicking around for a long time, since the 1970s, but since DFID adopted it in quite a big way, and now USAID also made it a core part of their process, and I think has our, for example, in South African government national evaluation framework, it's a key part of it is theories of change. Okay, so now we're talking about some tools, case studies, not so much around planning, but that's one of the ways that we measure what we're doing. So Ryan says that it is organization are busy refining the theory of change, yes, which has had many iterations in the past, and also very different ways of showing it. Sometimes theories of change can be simply a logic model, and sometimes they can be complicated diagrams. Okay, so there's lots of different, some people have spoken already about the kind of planning tools. We've spoken about log frames, we've spoken about theory of change, we've spoken about outcomes. So these are different methodologies that people can use to help you to develop your plans. So let's look at some of those in more detail. So firstly, I think I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so the results, essentially what we're talking about is a results-based approach to planning, monitoring, evaluation. So get this to the right size here. There we go. Most of these tools and ideas of planning that is conventional, let's say, is still within the results-based framework. Even outcome mapping, which is more on the left side, if you want to call it, think of it that way, on the left-wing side of evaluation, is allowing for more emergent outcomes. It's still within the results paradigm, trying to get organizations to think through the change that they want to see and to have at least some kind of a vision of where they go. Very often it's this top level, where you will have your policy influence intermediate and long-term outcomes, which will be aligned to the organization's strategic plans. So here you would have a strategic plan, possibly in the organization, and you would align your programs and your projects to that. And the same if you have, let's say, global strategy, your outcomes would be aligned, maybe at a particular level, to the global strategy. And this is the area where we like to think about influence. So here's the line of control, because below the line of control are the things that you can control as a program or project, and above the line of control are things like changes in behavior, attitudes, motivations that you cannot control, but you can only hope to influence. That's why we call this the area of influence, and this the area of control. And in the control area are your inputs, your computers, your people, your skill sets, and so on. Your activities, the kind of things you do. You run workshops, you do training, you do research. Your outputs, which could be a number of publications or certain strategies to influence particular agendas and so on. And then these are the things where you can control how much, how many, to what quality, and what timing, etc. Here is the influence area. So I think that's a useful distinction to remember, the line of control. But now, theory of change is moving away from kind of the linear logic model and trying to say we need to think about there are many different pathways of change. It's not just one. We can't try to condense our program and project into one pathway of change. We actually need to recognize the complexity and have more pathways of change. This is still a very simplified version. Of course, you can have multiple pathways of change. And you may even, of course, in reality have changes that you never expected. So there are people who, there are different ways to identify and measure levels of change, as I've spoken about, but framework, outcome mapping, theory of change. And I'm going to share with you just now 2 models that can help you think through your pathways of change. Think through what it is that you do to move from one activity or output to a whole lot of change. Let me give you an example. So for example, let's say, let's go back to this previous slide. These ifs and thens, they represent preconditions. So if this is a precondition, it must be in place in order to achieve this change. And this change or outcome then becomes a precondition for meeting that change. And this is then necessary in order to achieve that change. It's most likely that if you skip a step, the change won't happen. This is, how do we define that? How do we decide that? Well, that's usually based on, some evidence that you have of previous programs. You can pick that up from social science theory. You can get that from practitioner experience. There's different sources of evidence that help build your pathways of change. And then the idea is that you break that into small steps. So let's say you're providing policymakers with access to good quality research. Your first task is for them to engage with that research, and you hope that they will engage with that research. They will read it. They may even share it with their colleagues or with other people in their policy community. You want them then, if they at least have engaged with it, the next step is then they could use it to inform policy making. And let's say they use it to either to inform policy making or it may be to improve policy implementation. Then you want them to actually go out and implement that policy in a better way and to bring about better outcomes for their organization. So for example, let's say you've provided the policymakers with a good analysis of tax data. They've got this all this tax information that they're sitting on, and that it's never ever analyzed. And you bring someone in who can do this kind of work, and you are an organization that can do this. You analyze this tax information, and you're able to show them that there's a huge gap in their tax collection. They've got lots of people, for instance, who are registered as landowners that are not paying tax. So now they can see where those are. They go and they actively collect tax, and they're able to double their tax revenue just by going out and finding those people who are not paying their taxes. So that's a very concrete outcome that can have very huge positive impact for, let's say, that city that is now improving its tax collection. And if you break down all those small steps, get that, then you can have a good idea of where it is that you can, where your evidence, your research is contributing to that ultimate change. I personally like to think through pathways of change. A lot of people find it upsetting. They don't like to think in linear. They find it too linear. Even if we say we're open to emergent change and theory of change is about complexity, it still actually forces you to think in a logical way. Some people prefer to think about complexity in different ways. And there's a great, we talk about this in, I think it's in module 3, where we talk about log framers and circulars. And yes, it's in module 3 in box 4 on page 8. We've also got a post on P&I shared there that you can read on that, and the reference is at the end of the module. So if you want to find out more about that, you're interested in that angle, then you can go ahead and have a look at module 3 for more information. The 3 main approaches, though, within the results logic are the logical framework approach, outcomes mapping, and theory of change. These are planning or program design tools that help you to be more rigorous in the way that you do your program design. I've highlighted here what I think the different steps are, the biggest contributions of these, and there's no reason to say you have to stick to one approach. If you find you like something from one approach, you can absolutely do fusion. Logical framework starts off with a really good diagnostic analysis. It starts off with a stakeholder, understanding your stakeholders and understanding your problem. Most people hate log frames because they start with the matrix, with building the matrix, filling in the table. And actually, if you don't go through this planning step, you usually get a very bad logic. And these are the steps: stakeholder analysis, problem analysis. Once you identify your cause and effects of your problems, getting to the root cause, you then build an objectives analysis. You then consider alternative strategies, which also can help you, by the way, with things like contribution analysis. Like if we had done this alternative and not this, then possibly, maybe we would have achieved anything different. And then you develop your objectives. The assumptions in log frame are things like external risks. They're more like risks turned positive. If the government doesn't play along with us, then we won't be able to achieve this objective. So that's the logical framework approach, and then of course you have your indicators and means of verification. In outcome mapping, it's more about developing a vision. It starts with vision, not with problem. It's an ideological choice of the outcome mapping creators. So let's start with something positive, and then bring in the organization's mission. So it's mixing a little bit of organizational development into the plan, not so much just focused on program planning, but also bringing the organization into it. And what outcome mapping introduces is this idea of boundary partners. So here you're also doing an analysis of your stakeholders, but it's mostly of the people that you're working through. Who are your closest people that you work with in order to deliver the outcomes that you intend? Some people would have know the word maybe target group, but they don't like the language of targets. It's very kind of one-directional. So boundary partners is supposed to define that people are working and co-creating together. And then they develop the outcomes challenges, which are kind of goal statements or the outcome statements. And progress markers are indicators, but instead of just being measuring disconnected things in a logical statement, what's nice about progress markers is that they measure a process of transformation, a process of change. So if you put all your story indicators together, you should get a really nice story of change. Theory of change is a way of developing your story of change as well. what I think very powerful in theory of change is the assumptions, because it deviates from the assumptions in LOCOM, which are just about managing risks. And here you're actually bringing in your understanding of how and why change happens. So here you have to really think about your internal assumptions. Why do I think that giving policymakers access and opportunity to use information will lead them to implementing better policy, stopping bad policy? Why do you think that your particular methodology is good? So it really is about unpacking your own understandings of why you think your program works. So different tools, and they're worth exploring. So, okay, so there's just another slide that you can look at later, which talks about the different strengths and similarities of different tools, which is what I have spoken about now. This is a really nice way to think about change. So what I want to share in the next two slides is ways of thinking about change. And one model is this, the ecological systems model, or the nested model. It's used quite a lot in health work, quite a lot in social development. It helps you to think about what are the kind of changes you want to bring about, either on the individual level, the kinds of changes that you want individuals who you interact with to bring about. Changes in attitudes, perceptions, feelings, or behavior. So in terms of policy, you may want policymakers to be more receptive to a particular, let's say, to human rights agenda, to better health policy. And then, so that's working on the individual level. The second level is working on the level of relationships, or the MESA level. Here it is, you want to bring people in that particular community together. You may want to strengthen networks or partnerships. Here you really want to build a coalition if you're doing advocacy, or you want to build a policy community. If you want to create, perhaps there's a gap between the research and the policymakers, and there's no way for them to engage. There's no platform for dialogue and engagement. You want to create that. And that would then help to transmit your research to the policymakers. So you want to strengthen that. You want to create more voices. That's the level that you would look at there. And the third level is the structural, institutional, systemic level. Here you want to create an enabling environment for legislation, policy, infrastructure, whatever it is that issue that you're working on. It could also be creating a more receptive environment for evidence. Here you may want, for example, policymakers to be willing to use evidence, to have motivations in their system to use evidence. So, for example, in government, they have now introduced theory of change into their performance appraisals and into the way of assessing projects. So, there's system level changes that are encouraging the use of evidence. So, that's the broader one way of thinking about levels of change. This is another one. This is the advocacy and policy change composite logic model. Someone developed it, I can't remember who now, as part of their PhD, and there's quite a nice document that explains how to use it. But let me just go in to show you here. So, for example, what I quite like about this is you can plot your own, let's say, organization into it. A bit bigger. It shows you here you've got the kinds of inputs that you may achieve. So you can look at this, it's like a menu, and you can say, see where it is in your organization. These are the kinds of inputs, and skills, the kinds of activities or tactics that you may employ, policy analysis, research, policy proposal development, litigation, lobbying, and the kind of interim outcomes that you may achieve from that: media coverage, issue reframing, organizational capacity, partnerships or alliances, and then the ultimate policy goals that you want to achieve: policy development, placement on the policy, and so on. So have a look at this, and you can Google it as well, and you'll find that there's a very nice short document that explains how to use it, and that can give you some tools. So it's also another way to think about change is to think about different levels. Other ways to think about levels of change is as an outcome mapping. You can think about change from the perspective of the specific actor. So you could say, what are the changes I want to bring about with researchers in the community? What are the changes that I want to bring about in the policy with other think tanks? What are the changes that I want to bring about with the media? Maybe you want to do media training in your particular issue so that they write about it in a more sophisticated way. You may want to think about what it is that you want to achieve with bureaucrats. Maybe they need to have skills to engage with research. So it could be that you think from specific actors, because then it's actually a really nice way, and that's what outcome mapping does, to conceptualize the specific changes that you want to bring about. You can also think about at the higher level changes. We spoke about thinking about individual level change, and there, indicators would be, for example, youth increased belief in past or future. Population level change, where you want to measure at level like population data, health statistics, population of graduates. You may want to think about influence. Kinds of changes that you can have an influence. For example, where communities are able to advocate for improved schooling in their areas, where people are able to advocate for improved conditions where they live. People are able to say, for example, one organization here is using social auditing as a means of saying to the government, look, the services that you're providing are not working for us. So are you creating local level influence? Or are you wanting to help people to get more funding or leverage or different ways of getting money into the system or some kind of power shift? So different ways of thinking about change. And if you use a particular model, then it's quite a nice idea for quite a nice way to go into a planning process. Okay, so I'd just like to know if anyone been react to this thinking about change, if you find the ideas useful at all. Anything that speaks to you that you like about any of these particular models, or you have any questions about the different processes that we spoke about? And I went through that very quickly. So Vanesa's asking if I see a difference among those who use different planning processes and how they do M&E&L. In terms of, so Vanessa, I just want to understand your question. Difference in the, which planning, and yes. So, for example, I think that if people are using theory of change, they have a more stronger focus on measuring that and testing that theory in their monitoring evaluation system. So they will, if they're using theory of change, then they will be focused on checking their assumptions. Why, I spoke earlier that if people have access to research, they will do better policy. And then the focus of the monitoring evaluation system will be, well, is that true? Does our theory hold out in practice? Whereas I think people who are doing outcome mapping are more interested in gathering stories of change, in understanding transformation and what the enabling factors or the barriers are towards transformation. So probably a much more wider ambit than just focused on the specific key assumption. Ryan is interested in thinking more about unpacking the theory of change that you have been developing. An important point. Okay, do you have anything that you wanted to? Okay, so to unpack it into more smaller steps, is that what you're talking about, Ryan? So some more baby steps. And of course, you can have different versions of the theory of change. So you can have a summary version, that is it, or you can have, Yes, it's really important. And then you can have a kind of a version that you use to communicate externally. You can have a long version that you use more internally as well to really check your and unpack the assumptions. Assumptions is critical. It's absolutely critical that you get those right. Because to talk amongst people in the organization, because you may find that people hold different understandings of why they're doing things or why they think things should work. And if you get people together to talk about it, it's really a very good way of getting some common, making sure everyone's working in the same direction. So Sylvester, raising a very good point. Until now, focus has been really very much on output and on accountability, making sure that you said you would deliver 10 trainings, deliver 10 training. And now the question is, we're saying, we need to really think about what change did those 10 trainings bring about. And that's necessary. So pay more attention to this in the next section of the webinar. Okay, so if there aren't, let me just ask you then a question about this particular slide. Just before I hand over to Vanessa, can you just think about and maybe share an example of the kind of change that you would bring about with the people that you're working with? You said that, let's say, policy makers at the level of individual change. Can you give some examples from your work of where you may want to influence the attitudes, feelings, or behavior of policymakers? I can put that into like a statement. Yes. People are more aware of their rights and know where to claim them exactly. Another one that's not my screen. Yes, so Petra is sharing some more. So at a very high level, people may gain access to improved health or access to education. As Sylvester is saying, increased awareness and the voice of beneficiaries. Exactly, you may want policymakers to pay more attention to the voice of the people they're actually serving. More open attitudes towards certain groups of people, such as migrants or LGBTI. Exactly. So at a very individual level, you're wanting people to maybe think differently about an issue or approach an issue in a different way, have better understanding of the subtleties or implications of the kinds of policies that they're making. So those are really great examples. Thanks, everybody. So you can develop a muscle for thinking about change, and this is a way to do it using this kind of a framework. Thanks very much. I'm going to hand over to Vanessa.
Great, Dena. I think it's very useful to revisit and think about the ways we plan before really making decisions about the MEL strategy and what we focus on. So let us, the slides. Oh, just a minute, please. Once we are able to identify those paths of change, or whatever methodology you usually use to devise the roadmap of change. Of course, at the center of attention concern during our course is how we will be able to assess whether that change took place or not in the different levels that Dena has so clearly exposed in her presentation today. So how do we start then, right? We might have a plan. Some of you shared that you have different ways of doing this. Some have worked with clients who use theory of change. Some know how to use logic models. I am sure, I think you said, for instance, that they are in the preliminary stage, but for certain there might be some written document of your project, of a program, or even at the organizational level, where in some way you lay out the foundation of what you're going to do and why. These can be done in very different ways for sure, but the starting point is effectively what people think they will do, why, and probably in the cases where you're planning activities or your planning practices include some sort of monitoring and evaluation reflections. Maybe you also have some statements or written what are the type of changes you expect to see, what are the results, right, you expect to see. So how do we assess whether that happened or not? Of course, that revisiting planning, and as we go, ways to assess change and the levels of change and how to find indicators and ways to collect information about those indicators. You will probably need to refine in some way the planning. And of course, this is natural and it is to be expected, since plans are not set in stone. They are just ideas on how we see the future, and of course, that as we implement them, we acknowledge that there will be, we will need to revisit, change strategies, replace, reinforce activities, etc. But probably we hope that as we go through the course and you come out with a more specific and defined way in terms of how to monitor and evaluate policy influence, this will derive in changes in how you plan policy influence in the near future, when working with others and helping others conduct those plans. Usually when we think about projects or we think about plans of big areas of our work or programs, that this depend on how each organization is structured, there are some recurrent policy influence strategies that you deploy as a program or as an organization. Within those broad strategies, it is that you determine and you identify which are the activities and products that you will conduct. When I say policy influence strategies, I'm thinking about the broad ways of promoting the use of research in policy, the broad ways to influence policymakers, policy-making processes, and public policies in themselves. Thanks for that, Dena. Typical policy influence strategies are issue framing or refining a policy influence issue, or trying to influence or trying to convince people on some specific ways of defining a problem. Other influence strategies are the more related to the typical advocacy, right? Direct advocacy to decision makers or people and organizations who influence decision makers. Some organizations focus their efforts on developing relationships, ongoing relationships with these people. Or a policy influence strategy could be in itself strengthening the organizational capacity in general, your organizational capacity to influence policy. These are all typical policy influence strategies under which then we develop a set of activities and products. So when we are thinking about change, and I think that I cannot recall exactly who of you was saying this fact that we tend to measure more outputs and outcomes. I think that was Sylvester. I cannot recall exactly who was, but I thought that was a very interesting point. And probably the reporting practices are the annual reports we produce, or donor reporting. We do a lot of work in terms of telling the external stakeholders about our outputs, right? Okay, is everyone having a problem with the sound? Maybe it's action. Is it working well now? Okay. Hope it fixes soon, Vicky. Otherwise, as usually, you know that we're taping the whole session because we know that our bandwidth sometimes have these type of problems. So going back to how to assess change, and I would like for you to come in and confirm whether you are more seeing report outputs or reporting on how activities and products have been conducted and the type of products we have produced. These are the more typical, this is the most typical focus of our M&E efforts. Yes? Are you used to do more reporting on how activities and products went than on the changes that these activities and products had on stakeholders, on individuals, on other organizations? I see Petra typing in. I would like to know. Okay, good. Ryan is saying that no, that Ryan, so do you think that most of your efforts in terms of monitoring and evaluation is concentrated on the changes that happen as a consequence of your activities and products in different stakeholders and spaces? Good. Okay, so you'll find great. So maybe you can jump in when we get into the outcomes and share a little bit more about how you do it. And yes, to the point of Petra, when I'm saying this, when I'm talking about this tendency to focus more on outputs, this is to be expected. It's natural because this is the area that we control more, right? Almost 100% accountable for delivering a brief or holding a workshop or a meeting with policymakers that we wanted to conduct, than to say then what happened as a consequence, or what were the effects of that thing, or what were the effects of that policy briefs on different stakeholders, which is mostly the area where we want to have influence, but we cannot ensure that that influence is going to happen 100%, right? I'm seeing in the comments there. Ryan, yes, we'll get back into those indicators and outcomes shortly. I start with outputs and then we'll delve into outcomes, which is the more challenging way of assessing change. And yes, depending on how objectives have been formulated. If we have done our work well, when we decide this set of activities and products that we will deploy, we are thinking about how these activities and products will fit into the large objective. The objectives, which of course are related to strategies. So the changes are the signs, are the visible signs that tell us whether we're walking in the right direction or not. And if the objectives have not been very well formulated, we will have trouble in identifying those signs, and we'll get into it when we talk about outcomes, okay? But let us concentrate a little bit about outputs. I think that Ryan said that's not the case, but I think it's a practice that many of us are more savvy about in terms of measuring outputs. I just want to share some brief ideas that we think about when enhancing the way we measure outputs. Someone switch off. I don't know, Leandro, or I cannot see the zooming in here. I want to make this smaller, but the zoom is out. Let me share with you a couple of about outputs. Many times when I see and I review M&E&L plans, I see a lot of indicators and methods that have to do with assessing the quantity of the products or outputs, or the quantity of people who attended a webinar. I keep saying webinars. The quantity of people who attended a workshop of or a conference. Yes, I want to adjust the slide, but for some reason the zoom here. Hold a second. Sorry about that. Someone accidentally change the chat version, so that's where we have it well. So usually we have some typical indicators about outputs that respond to quantitative oriented questions about how many people attended or responded to attended a workshop, how many people responded to policy brief, or how many people went to our website, right? But there are many other relevant questions in terms of output of our outputs that are key in terms of assessing whether we are being able to walk towards our intended goals and our intended large changes or not. So let me share some of them. Let us, when we think about output, broaden our scope and think about the quality. Are we measuring the quality of our projects? Are our projects outputs of the highest quality possible quality? Are we using the best available knowledge to produce them? Relevance. Are our products really presented in the adequate within our current context? Are they talking the way we need them to talk with the relevant stakeholders? Do they prove that we are understanding the issue as our end users or beneficiaries are understanding it? Are we using the appropriate language? Or credibility? Are we being trusted? Are we using appropriate methods to check whether our products and activities are credible or not? Do we have processes to check the internal and external validity of what we are discussing? These are some aspects of outputs that are sometimes not seen or not included when we're to monitor and evaluate them. Questions can be around access to. I mean, we might have produced a good report. We might have created an X microsite with very relevant evidence on a policy issue, but these reports or websites in a way that the clear messages are very well detected and people can digest them. Are we being able to reach the audiences that we want to reach? Can they really access? And are they accessing those outputs? Who have we contacted? Through which channels are we being effective with this? Quantity is the most typical one, right? But sometimes, in terms of quantity, is also to think about the different kind of outputs. I mean, are we having a lot of the same? Or maybe we should have some other type of outputs while our activities are. Are we reaching the audience in a timely manner? So these are all type of relevant questions that are important in terms of identifying then the adequate and the appropriate indicators of your outputs. And of course, this has to be got to do again with the type of changes that you want to do. Petra was mentioning, I think, an example about let me go back to it when she was saying about if people are more informed about their rights, right? And they know where to claim them. I mean, they have access, for instance, to information about how to voice their or demand in terms of their rights. So depending on changes that you have envisioned, the type of relevant questions that you need to incorporate about outputs. This is very important in terms of not going directly to an indicator, but then first thinking about which are the questions you have around those outputs. Which are the aspects that are relevant for you, right, to understand the effects and the results of those outputs linked to the larger change you're trying to achieve. So here again, once you have determined and you thought about those aspects to have evaluate that are related to the questions you have, I think that's the right point to start thinking about indicators more comprehensive way, right? So if you're thinking about whether a research report has been relevant, you might think about, okay, we can see whether it has been relevant or not, if it has been quoted in some legislative discussions or sessions, or is it clear? If you want to know whether the ideas that we were trying to convey came out clearly and that people are understanding our main messages or recommendations, we can try to get some feedback from external evaluators. Evaluators could be the policymakers or people who work with them, or sometimes it's opinion leaders, only for the feedback from these from the spontaneous feedback, but think about ways to structure the gathering of that feedback. So here, as you have already seen the module, we have a lot of examples. Yes, Petra, these sources, and this is all present in the modules. So I'm going to them a little bit. This chart is, I'm not going to visit the chart ropes. You have it in the module. I'm just making the point about why it is important to think about the aspects and the general questions before delving into indicators. We provide you with menus, indicators for both outputs and outcomes in the course modules. And for the questions that I was sharing before, I split source. This is a Roma guide produced by ODI, but I'm certain that it's in the bibliography. I can send it separately too, if interested. But it's also among the whatever we quote is used bibliography in the modules. Yes? Good. Okay. You're welcome. A pleasure. So let us now delve more deeply into outcomes, which is probably a little bit more challenging and where the muscle has not been that developed in terms of assessing change. I just wanted to highlight some aspects of output, but let us delve into outcomes. And for that, briefly, to know, I mean, Ryan has already told us that they have developed some specific ways of thinking about outcomes and measuring them. How about the challenges you have faced there, Ryan? And I invite the rest to what are the challenges when you are thinking about assessing outcomes? This means changes at the level of stakeholders, changes at the level of policies or policy processes. Do you frequently stumble across challenges? Good, Ryan. And yes, this is a very frequent challenge in terms of identifying the indicators to measure those outcomes. Sometimes we feel that indicators are quite, in a way, poor, or that the ideal indicator to measure those outcomes is very difficult to really measure or to gather the information that we need, right? I see other comments. Determining the attribution or contributing factors. Do you mean factors, do you mean, Sylvester, here, whether you can attribute those outcomes that you see to the work of the organization, and to see whether you can say we contributed directly to this type of outcome, or this can be attributed 100% to our work. We can say we were one of those who contributed to this change in awareness or attitude. Here, Ryan is adding an example of indicators. Their highest indicator is direct, tangible changes to policy, but there is no assessment of what this means in practical terms. Great. So what about the story that got you there, Ryan? When you're saying, when you want to tell the story about how a tangible change happened to policy, with a case study where you're tracking down how people who were responsible for changes started to think differently, changed their attitudes, and how, who worked with them or who contributed to those intermediate changes that led to that tangible change? Okay, and changing the legislation could be minor, but scored high. So you have a rank. Are you scoring the type of outcomes? That's what you mean? I see others coming. I come to you. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes, I think you should try to think about those explorations, and I think you are bringing here an important point. Maybe you were able to affect a change in legislation long run. This is not enough, because maybe the people who will then need to implement haven't been influenced in the way, or haven't developed their capacities. So maybe it scored highly, but it's not a major gain. So I think it's very important there to lay down the path and to understand what needs to happen for that policy changing legislation to really contribute to the impact that you are trying to have. I see then the attribution comes again, yes, and whether the outcomes have been truly achieved, yes. This is a recurrent challenge, and Sylvester was also mentioning this fact about attribution. So we'll start talking a little bit about what are the type of outcomes that you might want to identify as potential outcomes and what are the ways to measure them, right? And as Sylvester is pointing out, sometimes we don't have the enough time or resources to really assess all the change. So hold a second, I see. Yes, the time to listen and observe. Yes, that's very resources to do that are very difficult. So again, here I think this leads to the point of determining exactly what would be relevant in terms of outcomes for you to track. And sometimes why we invited to do this SWOT analysis or this capacity assessment you had in place, because sometimes to do that, you might need to decide to stop doing other things. And this is like the strategic path that hopefully we will help you walk through the course in terms of to fall into typical indicators that in the end don't take us a lot of time to gather, but they are not telling us the things we need them to tell us. It is that if there are specific outcomes and indicators that are really key and strategic, and they are the only ones who would really tell us whether we're walking in the right direction or not, we should try to focus efforts and resources there. Dena here was adding that defining what policies means is very important. Yes, exactly. We started the course with the definitions of policy and the different types. I mean, there's not only one definition, that this will probably vary from project to project, from program to program. You might have a program that is more focused on reframing a policy issue at this stage, while others developing capacities in policymakers to implement the changes. So yes, it's definitely very important to think about the type of policy change, and that would lead into the outcomes we want to see. And now when we see the outcomes directly related to the sort of policy change they are. Okay, now Sylvester was also getting a point about senior levels. Do you mean that senior levels to invest enough time and resources to assess those outcomes, or maybe because sometimes what I've seen is that the reluctance to measure those changes is because that would reveal a lot about the relevance and the quality of a whole program, and this might be a critical information for them that maybe sometimes they don't want to see. Yeah, this is a recurrent challenge, and the reluctance to identify those outcomes comes from it makes more clear whether people who are leading activities and products and are proud of them want to see how those are strongly linked to the intended change or not. I mean, there's like a lot. What we're trying to do here is to unravel this black box between the intentions and general goals and the day-to-day activities and products or monthly products that we try to develop. And that black box is the one that we want to focus on, and I need to move on in this way. But it's expected that we will find some reluctance, and that's why today we're having this session when we finish the webinar about cultural related aspects. We need to take that soft and intangible side of the story in to understand how to deal with MEL. So key questions about outcomes, and this is maybe related again to what some senior level or leaders in organizations want to do or not. I mean, do they want to open themselves up to these sort of questions in terms of really understanding and gauging which stakeholders are reacting to our out products activities? I mean, this might be easier, right, for those who are more in the academic side, to see where if the research is being referenced or downloaded, but then when, right? How is that research being referenced and how is it being shared? By whom? Are these the really relevant people? Are we getting feedback, enough feedback and good feedback from the targeted audience and from the influential state? We just have a number, or do we just have very spontaneous and brief interactions with some of them, but we cannot really understand right now whether they are using and they are benefiting from those outputs the way we are wanting? Are we aiming at an attitude type of change? So is feedback telling us about a change in attitude? So it's just feedback in terms of the discourse, or is it feedback just about acknowledging that now they know something they didn't know before? So these are, again, examples of questions, and these are just a guidance for you to start thinking about which, before determining the outcomes, to think about which questions would lead you to identify those outcomes, and then think about indicators. Yes, I put them in the weak position, so we have to be politically savvy in terms of how to start making these questions with them too, and to see that we don't expect excellent answers. We just need to find out to improve the way we do things. And if we haven't been influential stakeholders this time, what in our activities and products should be improved so that we can be better in the next round? Of course, this entails that we're working in a learning organization and that people are really eager to become better and to acknowledge the shortcomings in terms to improve in the future. So this is not an easy task at all. So here are some other set of questions, and this is something that you will have with the PowerPoint. It's just a guidance, but in terms of the exercise 2 and exercise 3 that we talk about them a little bit later, it's important that to make the point about choosing some questions and having some generic questions about change that you want to answer before delving into the specific outcomes and indicators. So here, as I was mentioning before, in module 4, you have an extensive list of outcomes just to inspire you. You will be able, we talked a little bit about the types of changes at the individual level in the webinar 1, in module 1, distinguishing changes in terms of attitudes, behaviors, etc. Do you remember that? And then we also talk about relationships, and Dena was sharing today the idea of also consider this meso level type of outcomes that have to do with changes in relationship in organizations or new alliances. And I just took off one photograph of one possible strategy when we're trying to refine, and the strategy usually has to do with a policy influence goal, or we are more working at the agenda setting level, and we're trying to maybe have that issue differently, have a different lens to understand a policy issue. For instance, to look into youth employment through the lens of education, the education that needs to take place before thinking about youth employment. So sometimes our strategy has to do with achieving that the issue is framed and understood differently. So what could be possible outcomes? We might be, we want to see that there's an increased knowledge on this issue, that people understand the links between how young people are being educated in high school and how that is enabling them to access third level education or to access some sort of some types of work. So an indicator could be whether the public is recognizing that there's a link, right, between youth secondary or high school education and access to work. So the outcomes can be also shaped at different levels. You can think about short term. Here we name them, and this comes from a guide that we adapted with things about short term outcomes with changes in awareness, for example, changes in beliefs, in attitudes. The time frame will depend on, of course, the length of the unit that you are using for your MEL efforts. Of course, that short-term outcomes will differ if you're talking about the whole organization and what the organization wants to achieve, or the program or a project. The same would happen with mid and long-term outcomes. This is not a set-in-stone formula. The important thing is that, as Dena was showing with the path of change, that one really determines what needs to happen then first for them to see the second level of change and third level of change. So you might use the organizations that choose to just have outcomes in general. There are organizations that like to have midterm and long term. There are others that have three levels of outcomes. It depends on how you foresee that you will be able to track and monitor and evaluate the effort. Of course, that the short-term outcomes are the ones that are more related to the direct effects of outputs that you have within a project or a program. The results, or what you have seen that has happened as a consequence of a certain activity or product, and whether that led to some change in attitude or in a belief. Here again, the challenges that you mentioned in terms of contribution and attribution are very important. And in the upcoming modules, we will center on the webinar. We will talk about data collection methods and the approaches. And this is where you will get more insights into determining which are the most appropriate ones to identify whether and how those changes that you can detect can be linked to your own work, to your projects, to your people. So we'll get there. This is a two-way direction. Usually when we think and we devise MEL plans and programs, we will start laying out the outcomes and the changes based on the planning, and we will start thinking about some indicators. But then, of course, that there is some of you were raising this point about resources and time. So once we get into the methods that we are going to use and the of information, we will need to refine this, and probably the brainstorming about indicators and outcomes will need to be shortened in terms of really determining with your capacities, with your resources, with the time frames that you're going to use, which is the most meaningful information and data that you can gather using which methods. And then some will need to be left out. The challenge here is to leave out the ones that are not important, that might be the easy ones to track, but they are not telling us the story. They are not giving us the signs we need to see in terms of assessing change. So hopefully, as we walk through the exercise, you will be able to walk this path. And finally, one consideration, especially when we are laying out the type of outcomes and the type of potential indicators. I don't know if anyone has seen this video. We're running out of time today, so I just send the link for you to watch it. But this is a video to make the point about unexpected outcomes, right? The point here is not to concentrate when we are devising our plan only on the changes that we foresee or want to happen, but always have some way to identify unintended outcomes as well. The things that happen that we were not expecting, both positively and negatively, and see what those reveal and what we can do about them. So I'm sorry that we couldn't play the video now, because we really need to move on into the next steps to wrap up in sake of your time. But I will send the link, and I invite you to watch it and see what happens when we're just focusing on the things that we want to see, and what happens when what can happen in the backstage that we might miss and might be important. Any questions or comments about this before we move on to the next steps? I see Sylvester, they are typing. I know this has been a lot today, and we have the forum continue, of course, and we have the chat now today. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Dena, as I don't know if as they come in, maybe you want to step in and share with everyone how we're going to move on.
Okay,
Good.
great. Thanks, Vanessa. That was really interesting. Every time I learn or hear something new. Thanks for sharing your insights. Just to mention that there are a few slides. We had them prepared, so we thought we would share them with you. And these are, it's a case study example of how we would apply the different ideas that we spoke about today. So, have a look at that presentation, which is will be loaded when we will load it to the module, to the forum. So in terms of the next step, some people wanted to talk a little bit deeper about changing organizational culture around learning, how to get not just a kind of compliance attitude around monitoring evaluation, and that we'll do in a chat, and I will continue in this platform. We also need to think about the next exercise, which is due already on November the 4th. Now, this exercise is voluntary. You don't have to participate in it. And that is shared in the link in the module, what that exercise is. On page 15 of module 4, it is to decide a focus for a monitoring, evaluation, and learning effort, where we ask you to think about what would your specific policy influence objective be or strategy relevant to a current effort, to think about the kind of changes that would be related to your effort, and to then think about some kind of indicators that would be useful to track those changes, and also ways to think about identifying relevant unexpected outcomes. Now, there's also a suggested process for doing that. This exercise is voluntary. You don't have to do it, but it will certainly help you with exercise 3. It's one of the steps you will need to do for exercise 3 anyway. So basically, we're offering you the chance to do a bit of it now and get our feedback before you move on to exercise 3, or you can decide to do it all in one go. So that's that. We'd like you to continue your participation in the forum. We're asking a lot of you. We're trying to stimulate ideas and throw questions out, even if you don't respond. I hope they at least stimulate your thinking. That would be nice to have more participation in the forum. And Vanessa's asking if you're all able to follow the pace of the course. Is it too fast for you releasing a module a week, or are you managing to keep up? Okay, so it's working for Ryan. Okay, yes, you might forget. That's a good point. So to keep you on the ball. Okay, so for some people who are traveling a lot, it's difficult to keep up. Please speak to us if you need to delay a submission, or or but just keep in communication. Okay, and Vicky's okay. Okay, great. So we don't want to add too many more demands on you, but we would really like to produce some collaborative material out of this course. And one of the things Vanessa and I were thinking was to develop a combined presentation. So something that we can co-create, and that if each person could think about if you would like to participate in this combined presentation, that everyone shares at least one slide. Everyone prepares one slide only on what your main lesson or takeaway from this course was, and possibly how you would intend to use it. So 1 or 2 slides of 2 minutes each, and then we'll put them together, and that will be a combined resource that we can share with everyone. It will also be a way for you to reflect on your lessons with the course. So if you'd like to volunteer for participating in that slideshow or presentation, the slide share, please, I'll open up a forum, a question on the forum, and we can talk about what's a suitable date for doing that. We can either make it part of the final webinar, which is on page, which is going to be on November the 10th. Or we can think about maybe doing a special session depending on how much participation we get. So think about that. Would be really, really great if we could create something together that's emerged out of this course. That would be a really real living resource. Okay, so thanks everyone. Is there anyone who'd like to stay now for half an hour to talk more into 15 minutes to talk more about the culture of learning and how to build that rather than just, I mean, we think some of the tools that we've shared will do this, build this culture if you do it in a participatory way, and we can talk more about that. Anyone going to stay now? Okay, Petra. Okay, so it's Sylvester wants to have a chat. So the rest of you can log out, and then we'll stop this recording, and then we'll start another one. Thanks, everybody. It's been great having a webinar and a chat now with you. And we look forward to, we're busy, Vanessa and I are busy marking, reviewing your exercises, and we'll give you feedback latest early next week.